Welcome everyone, Costin here with Jedi Survivor, and how I've managed to get it to run at a fairly good frame rate. Or rather, how someone else managed to get it to run at a fairly good frame rate, and I am taking advantage of what they did in order to actually play this game at a good FPS. Now, right now, I am running at 70, 80, 90, maybe even 100 FPS. Depends on the area. An area with grass in particular still presents quite a few problems at the moment in the game. But in an area like this, and the majority of the combat areas you're going to be dealing with are going to be areas like this. In an area like this, I can actually get good FPS with my settings maxed out. This is on epic visual settings, everything maxed out, ray tracing enabled, FSR disabled. HDR is disabled, but not because of any performance issues or stability issues or anything like that. It's just because recording HDR is tricky, especially when you're stressing out your computer, as I certainly am at the moment. You can use NVIDIA GeForce Experience or NVIDIA Share, but I can't do that and show you the overlay for the performance over here, nor can I show you what exactly I'm using to improve the performance. And this looks pretty great. Like, this is what you'd expect the game to look at, this is what you'd expect the game to run at, though you are certainly going to get performance drops, because essentially you're using a mod. In this case, I'm actually using two mods to improve the performance to the level that I want. And again, it's not perfect, because to get it running as you like, you would actually need the developer to give a crap to actually release a proper PC version, which Respawn didn't. So before I get into the fix, I need to rant about Respawn and Electronic Arts and the way they handle this. Because, let's be clear, this is all on them. It's not like, oh, games are so complex right now that this can't be done or there isn't a solution. Well, clearly there is a solution, even if it is an imperfect one. And imagine if a team of developers were actually working on the solution as opposed to just one or two guys making a mod that fixes it. Yeah, imagine that. Cavalry Jedi. That is funny. So, when you start the game, let's just talk about this. When you start the game, Respawn tells you this game is meant to be played with controller. I call horseshit on that. And you know what? Not even Namco Bandai with Dark Souls 1 did something like that. They didn't care to make a proper PC version for Dark Souls 1, but they never did something along those lines. Like, From Software was never so arrogant as to tell you what control method you should use. At least not in the game itself. They did say it in interviews, but not in the game itself. And you know what? I'm gonna tell you something about that. It is a common misconception that quite a few people have created with regards to Souls game. Because this is what Jedi Survivor is. It's a Souls game. Well, here's a reality with regards to a game like this, and a reality for all of the Dark Souls games, including one, or at least the remastered version 1. I would not recommend playing Dark Souls 1 with a mouse and keyboard. The advantage of mouse and keyboard is that you get better camera control. Now, some people will argue, oh, but your movement, WASD, is not as good. But you don't move with WASD, you move as, like for instance here, I'm just holding down W and I'm using the mouse to steer my character. I mean, you can use WSD to help you out to that. That's how it works. But it's like the primary movement way is to use the mouse with W or D and the mouse, or S or the A. That's how you control. That's how you handle movement. Responsiveness is not the problem or anything like that. And in fact, it's actually better to play with mouse and keyboard for these kind of games, at least in a certain context. But why is it better? Well, the PvP community of the Souls games, so we're talking Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Bloodborne, if it ever got mouse and keyboard support, But certainly Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, as well as Elden Ring, what they discovered is that, well, using a mouse for that kind of camera control is actually quite important in PvP. So having that kind of camera control is a crucial advantage. So a developer making that statement is infuriating. You know what's even worse? That the game actually runs quite well with mouse and keyboard. It has mouse and keyboard prompts, unlike Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 initially. Though Dark Souls 1 has since gotten it on PC with the remastered version. But the problem is anything in the menu is an absolute pain. Controlling your character with mouse and keyboard is just fine. Playing the game, dealing with combat scenarios is just fine. No issues whatsoever. No issues in response time. No issues with all that. It is annoying when you have to press multiple keys to get an action where you could, normally in a lot of games just press a single keybind to make it to work. But it does function. I'd say Sony did a much better job with God of War, which is also a Souls-like game, the way they made God of War, the recent 2 games. But all the same, you can handle it just well on mouse and keyboard. But it gives you an idea of how the developers think. The other problem is they obviously didn't put a lot of effort into optimizing the PC version. And even worse, they didn't implement DLSS. Now, if you're an AMD user, you might say, oh, they got an AMD support deal. But the game doesn't run well on AMD hardware on PC either. So you have FSR, but it does zilch. It's not really going to improve your performance. And what's even worse about this particular title is that regardless of the settings you're using, like by default, if I was using the fix, I could set everything to low and I'd get crappy performance all the same. Like it might go from like say 40 to 50, but considering the computer I'm using with like a 4070 Ti, 32 gigs of RAM, NVMe driver, i7 9700K. Granted, the CPU is not the best in the world, but it's still a pretty damn good CPU. And my computer can handle virtually every other game on max settings without any kind of major issue. And hell, I can even handle this game without any major issue on max settings if I use a mod. But what does that? It does reveal like how little of a shit that Respawn and Electronic Arts gave about this game. Like I'm getting 100 FPS right now. Fun situation. Okay. So. They took the AMD deal, and my theory with regards to that AMD deal is it wasn't about the PC version in any way, shape, or form. It really all was about... All right. It was all about getting the game... it was all about getting the game running well on consoles, because consoles use AMD hardware, so I figured that... My theory is that the reason the game even is playable on consoles is because AMD helped them out with that. Without AMD support, it would have run just as badly on consoles. So yeah, they generally did a really piss poor job with this particular title, I have to say. But it is possible to get it to run well. Now, the third thing is that they use Denuvo on PC. And why is that important? Well, I've done a whole video on that subject, but suffice to say, Denuvo has a major performance impact, or at least the latest version of Denuvo does. We saw this with Hogwarts Legacy. We don't know for certain what the performance impact is of Denuvo on PC for this particular title, because there is no way to remove Denuvo at the moment. Yes, there is no crack, if you will, for the game. We are talking about cracking the game, but when people did that, when people removed Denuvo in Hogwarts Legacy, they were able to get over 20, maybe even 30 FPS. Depends on the area, of course, but they were able to get overall much better performance than they had previously. And that is critical, I would argue. It shows you how much of a performance impact Denuvo has, because Denuvo is pretty good as a DRM measure in terms to prevent people from cracking the game, but it obviously comes at a major performance impact at the moment. I mean, it always did. Like, the older versions always had, like, there was a memory issue and all that kind of stuff, but now it's gotten significantly worse than it was in the past. It has gotten more effective. It is difficult to crack it, to be sure, but when you're losing like 10, 20 FPS easily in games that use de novo, yeah, you're just gonna piss off a lot of people. And more importantly, because I think Elden Ring uses de novo as well, and you can't exactly turn it off for that. I mean, even if you could, it's like you're losing the multiplayer aspect of the game, so that's not great. But yeah, de novo is a pile of crap that has a major impact, and they used it. With all the issues that it caused, they still used it because they did not care. Those are the problems. Like a developer that did a poor job, that didn't implement DLSS, and that implemented de novo. Brilliant job. So what's the fix then? How do you fix the problem? Well, the way to fix the problem is to use a mod from a fellow called Pure Dark. Now, this is going to require two things. One, it is going to require a 4000 series GPU. It might work on a 3000 series GPU. I think some people have made it work. Maybe it's for some particular titles, but you are going to need a 4000 series GPU if you want this to work. Keep in mind that by default, this game still runs badly on a 4000 a series GPU. And if there's any, by the way, any stuttering in this video, it's not because I'm experiencing that necessarily in game. It's because of the recording software I'm using in conjunction with like a very, very intensive game right now. It's not the most optimal recording method, but I did want to show you the overlay. Okay, so there's a fellow called Pure Dark. He's got a Patreon. It does cost money to get this. But what he's done is he's been implementing DLSS free with frame generation in certain games, like Fallout, for instance, and crucially, Jedi Survivor. It does cost $5 to get it. But it does work. That's the thing. It does work. Now, it is a pretty crappy situation, and it really reveals something about the developer, how little they give a fuck about the situation. You can't expect DA, given their partnership with AMD, though, to suddenly implement DLSS. That is not going to happen, unfortunately. But you can use the mod. Now, it's not perfect, but damn, does this game look amazing and run pretty solidly with it. As I said, it's not perfect. So what does this do? Well, it uses a customized version of Reshade that adds DLSS in the game. The way it works is you subscribe to his Patreon, you get access to the Discord, that you get it. There is some shimmering, there is ghosting, like you can see the shimmering here on the mount I have. So it's not going to be perfect. And it only works in 1440p at the moment. But what this does is add DLSS. Now I'm using the quality preset over here, and I'm dead. It uses, like, I could turn off the quality preset or go ultra quality. It isn't really a problem necessarily, because DLSS in itself is not necessarily going to give you the performance fix you want. What is, however, going to really improve your performance is something else. It is called frame generation. So, what does frame generation do? And is pretty telling, as I said, that one guy was able to do this on his own, and he made it work pretty well considering what we're talking about and what he was able to achieve. Like, if I was playing without it, well, I can show you how much I get without it, because I will just disable it, but the way frame generation works, it's basically a cheat. What it does is uses AI to generate frames, like every 2 frames, like the AI is, or every other frame, the AI is generating a frame based on the information it has. Now, this can look badly in certain areas, like if you're moving very, very quickly, like let's say the Spider-Man game, for instance, people saw that the ran had its issues, but it's still pretty early technology. But the thing is, you can get double the FPS. In something like The Witcher 3, the next-gen edition, where the way they implemented ray tracing in that particular game, they brute forced it. So all the fancy technology features that Witcher 3 has at the moment for the next-gen edition, they're implemented in such a way that the performance impact is significant. But if you're using DLSS and frame generation, you can go to from like 40 FPS to 100 FPS, and I have done so. Now, you can turn this off, and I'm going to do so over here. So if I turn it off, I drop to 50, 40, 37. This is how the game runs by default. It still has DLSS, keep in mind. It still has a regular DLSS over here. And it still has NVIDIA Reflex on. But without frame generation, I lose a significant amount of FPS. Now, there are some image quality concerns, of course, with frame generation. As I said, it's not... Even when properly implemented, it still has its issues. When it's used in such a brute force manner, basically when it's implemented like this, it clearly has its issues. Like the performance is not consistent at all. Like you can get 100 FPS with this, or you may get 40. Though generally I haven't seen it drop that much below 50. But it does function, at least. And you know what? While obviously the performance in these kind of like open areas is not going to be the best, sorry about that, just a few issues there. While the performance in these kind of open areas is not going to be the best, it is going to give you a significant performance increase in the combat areas, because a lot of combats, like a lot of the missions in this game does take place in like more enclosed areas where you would have better performance by default. The worst performing area is the cantina over here. So if you want to enjoy Jedi Survivor, at least in part, at 100 FPS with dips to 50 as opposed to 20, then this is what you do. $5 and you need a 40 series GPU. It might be possible to make it to work on a 30 series GPU, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that. I think some people have made that work, but it isn't reliable. Like any kind of measure created by a community of fans.
Let's keep moving.
And that's where we are. That's the sad state of affairs of the gaming industry. And you know what? I'm just going to end this video and say that after the disasters that EA has made over the last couple of years, like be a Battlefield 5, Anthem, etc., I have no particular desire to actually play any of their games in the future. Like at this point, I'm not even going to be excited about the Electronic Arts game. Like maybe the next Dragon Age game can end up being good. It's not like Dragon Age Inquisition didn't have its own issues. It did. But it did have its own issues, but at least it was an okay game. But I can't necessarily expect that from the next Bioware title or the next EA title. I think really EA, like it's not like their games are completely horrible. And you know what, Jedi Survivor is not a completely horrible game. It is a functional game. It is a pretty solid game. It can be enjoyable, but it's like there's so many issues that come along with it, be it performance issues, which, to be clear, Inquisition, Battlefield 5, like Battlefield 5 is just a crappy game in general. Like a lot of the EA games that have been released over the last couple of years have had severe issues, be it performance or quality, and I'm like, what are you doing, EA? I mean, I know it's EA, I know we like to bitch and moan about it, but it's like, I don't think it's ever been this bad, honestly. With regards to Electronic Arts. So, Costin here, signing off. And stay tuned for more.